Hello there. My name is Scott Stiles, and I help medical device companies develop and implement practical, risk-based compliance strategies and right-sized quality management systems. Today I'm going to be covering a very important and fundamental concept around quality management system procedure and work instruction writing. The primary question I'll be exploring is, does verb choice matter? The obvious answer is yes, it does. But how important is it? As I investigate this topic, I'll be covering what the important verbs are and when to use them, give some helpful tips for reviewing your documents to ensure you don't miss any of the important requirements, and introduce some practices to avoid while providing solutions for you to consider. All this and more to help you have a great result during your next audit or inspection. Before we get into the details, let's take a moment to consider how important is the use of the proper verb to consider as you write and update your procedures. If you're like me, you probably haven't given much thought to verb forms since primary school. It's pretty easy to rely on grammar checkers in Microsoft Word or a solution like Grammarly. But for medical device companies, using the proper verb form within documentation can mean the difference between being able to demonstrate you meet the requirements of standards or applicable regulatory requirements and being on the receiving end of a nonconformance finding after your next audit or inspection. So as quality and regulatory professionals, we need to pay attention to it. To get us started, let's look at what ISO 13485 has to say about the verbs used in this quality management system standard. The authors of ISO 13485 have included a clarification of concepts section, which, among other topics, provides descriptions of their use of the various verb forms used throughout the standard. The verbs used in ISO 13485 include shall, which is a requirement, should, a recommendation, may, a permission, and can, which is meant to mean a possibility or a capability. Now, I went through the standard and counted all instances of shall, and unsurprisingly, considering all the various verbs used, shall was chosen over 90% of the time. I got a similar picture when going through FDA's quality system regulation as well. With this in mind, let's talk about shall first, then later I'll cover the other verbs a bit as well. So what shall you do? Everywhere a standard or regulation uses shall, you must demonstrate within your quality management system that the requirement is documented. You must pay close attention when you see shall and mirror this meaning within your QMS documentation. This is not the time to try and sneak in one of the less definite verbs to attempt to give yourself an excuse if you fail to show evidence of meeting the requirement during an audit. But this is not to say that you should make every verb a shall when should, may, or can is appropriate. Okay, so we've talked about how shall is the dominant verb used in ISO 13485 and FDA's QSR. But when and why are the other verbs used? In the QSR, should is actually not used at all, while in ISO 13485 it is used just once in the definition of manufacturer, because regulatory requirements may vary depending on the competent authority. May is used just a few times within the definitions section of ISO 13485. Again, since regulatory requirements may vary depending on the competent authority. Can is used in ISO 13485 to show compliance with the standard is voluntary, to refer to other standards for further information, and within several definitions. It is also used in a few places within the main body where certain applications or scenarios have capability to impact quality. Okay, so here's a helpful tip to help you prepare ahead of writing or reviewing your documents. The first step is to use the Find feature, Control F, to find all the instances of shall, should, may, and can within the standard or regulation document you need to comply with to produce a checklist of requirements you don't want to miss, along with areas where other verbs may be acceptable. Then, as you review your document, use the Find feature again to find instances of shall, should, may, can, and other similar verbs to ensure the right intent is being used and aligns with the checklist you created in the first step. So now that we've covered which verbs are used along with why and how, let's get into a few things to watch out for. The first thing is, as you write your procedures or work instructions, it is tempting to include all the nice to have, best practices, or recommendations for a given process without giving full consideration as to if you fully intend to be held to discrete compliance to what you have written. I call this the well-intentioned author syndrome, and it is a trap that I've fallen into myself. The thing to keep in mind is if you use shall in the document, even if the process is not required according to the standard or regulation, Auditors are likely to hold you to it and expect to see evidence that it is happening. Often these are best practices related to helping things run more smoothly or efficiently. Including this information can be especially important to how an organization runs. But if it is not strictly necessary to carry out the intent of a requirement, you should carefully consider whether it is best to include it. If the decision is made to include it, then it should be carefully referred to as guidance or a similar term. This is where it may be appropriate to utilize terms such as should, may, or can. However, you do want to use caution even if you identify it as a recommendation, as an auditor may see it as necessary to carry out a requirement within a standard or regulation, and you'll be in for a fight. A second tip, which expands on the first point, is to be practical or risk-based within your documentation. Being overly prescriptive in the definition of a process can often be a trap. The best approach may not be to have extremely detailed instructions for every step, depending on the risks related to the process. Where the associated risks are low and the standard or regulation does not prescribe a particular approach, then it may be better to leave the process open to some variation, especially in smaller organizations that rely on just a few individuals to perform the activities. In general, though, as the complexity of the organization increases, the number of people involved, and the risks involved increase, the prescriptive nature of the process may need to increase as well. But you should always be careful not to take it too far and implement something that is so detailed that people cannot understand how to use it or consistently apply it. Albert Einstein has been credited with saying that if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. I think he was right, but I still don't understand the theory of relativity. But anyway, you should only plan to include best practices as shall statements if your organization can truly stand behind the process and it is appropriately staffed to carry it out consistently. Otherwise, if it is important to your organization, then only include these statements as guidance if you have a compelling argument for why they are not strictly necessary to carry out the requirements of the standard or regulation. Okay, time to wrap it up. A terrific way to avoid receiving an easy nonconformance observation from an auditor is to pay attention to the use of which verbs are used and in what situations within your procedures and work instructions. Follow my tips for using the find function, Control F, within software programs for identifying the important verbs to ensure, at a minimum, all the shalls are covered consistent with the intent of the standard or regulation. Finally, always apply a risk-based, practical approach to your quality management system documents and balance your best intentions with the current capabilities and needs of your organization. Thanks for watching. I hope you find this information helpful as you establish or update your quality management system procedures and work instructions. If you need further advice or help with writing or reviewing your documents, please contact me. You can contact me through my website, linked in the description below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to be notified when I put out new content. I wish you all the best during your next audit or inspection. Goodbye.